We are continuing our discussion with today's guest, Scott Ludlam. Scott, very important, simple question. What's your background before politics? What's your life?
Going back far enough, I trained as a graphic designer, so I didn't come through traditional law or politics. In fact, I was not at all interested in politics till I was well into my 20s. I came into this work and into the Greens through anti-nuclear campaigning. So my light bulb moment was the Jabiluka campaign in 1998, where you had an Aboriginal community in Kakadu in the Northern Territory fighting the nuclear industry, the mining industry, the Commonwealth government and the Territory government. Took them all on, called for help, needed help, and stood very strong, and they won. And there's still no uranium mine at Jabiluka at the moment.
Scott, tell us please, what is the Greens going to do with the budget, and which are the points which you are absolutely against?
Well, quite a bit. I think this budget should never have seen the light of day. I think it's the most hostile federal budget in modern political history. There's never been anything like it.
Why do you think, what's behind that? What's the motivation?
I think what's happening is, to my mind, it's not even about ideology. I think this government and the Liberal Party and the National Party in particular has been captured by a very small cohort of industry groups, very specific ones, financial services and banks, the coal and the gas industry, the copyright industry or the rights holders industry, if you like, and a number of other industry groups who have effectively captured the government's policy making and are now running tax policy and budget policy according to their needs. And according to a very hardline right-wing ideology that says we need to run the Commonwealth government as though it's a big corporation. Get rid of anybody who's not contributing. Just young people, pensioners, disabled people, Aboriginal people. If we can't see you strongly on the balance sheet of Australia Inc., then you're sacked. What we saw, I think, is a budget that the more vulnerable you are in society, the less political power you're seen to have, the harder this budget hits you. People at the very top end, the very wealthy, have done extremely well out of this budget. Everybody else has been smashed, and that's why we'll be opposing it.
So what the Greens will oppose, or you yourself?
Everything, every part of it that we can. So speaking for the Greens as a whole, things like the Medicare co-payment, bills that will come in around changes to education funding and welfare, the way that welfare is delivered, the way that people on disability support pension are looked after or not looked after, hopefully some of the housing and homelessness stuff. Anything that comes in a separate bill that the Senate can take a look at and block or amend, we'll be taking a very, very strong look at. And that's not one single bill, and I think maybe there's a bit of confusion in the community as to why we don't just block supply and create another election, is that that's up to Tony Abbott. That's up to him. And at the moment with the polling...
So the other political parties could not force him into another election, double dissolution?
The only way you get a double dissolution is if there's a bill that's lined up that's been blocked twice. None of the budget bills meet that criteria. Probably, my instinct is by the end of July, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and the rest of the clean energy package will actually be a double dissolution trigger. Now, I'll tell you what, if Tony Abbott wants to go to a double dissolution election on any of those budget measures or on the question of climate change and the clean energy industry, bring it on. Sooner the better. We're ready.
Any compromise possible?
The compromise will come about when we actually see some of the budget bills, because keeping in mind we're working in the dark somewhat. Some of these ideas the government's made up as they've gone along. There's no legislation. We don't know how it even intends to work. More dangerously, the government itself doesn't know how it's going to work. When we see the bills, if it's different to what's been advertised, then we can work with it. But as far as I'm concerned, this government lied its way into office. They didn't tell people that there would be cuts to the ABC, cuts to health, cuts to education, cuts to disability support. They actually said precisely the opposite. So they've lied their way into office. They've attacked everybody from Aboriginal people to people on disability support to the clean energy industry, and then just expect the Senate to wave it through as a courtesy. I'm sorry, that's not going to happen.
Joe Hockey used to say, and still saying it every day almost, everyone contributes, so everyone have to chip in.
Point to me in the budget where Gina Rinehart has chipped in. I don't understand why taxpayers on low incomes should be paying Gina Rinehart's fuel bill, her diesel bill. Forget it. You know, where are the banks chipping in? You know,
No.
the miners, the banks, the big corporations, the big end of town, not only are they not chipping in, they're dragging this government around on the end of a very short leash. I think people have had a gutful. If anything good has come out of this budget, it's been the strong, unified tide of opposition to what they're trying to do to our country. That is impressive, and that gives me hope.
You think this budget is very un-Australian?
I think it's just very inhumane. It's un-Australian in the sense that we have this vision of ourselves with some justification as being egalitarian, as being the country of the fair go. We didn't have an embedded class system, although I suspect Aboriginal people would strongly disagree with that, and that it was a place where you could work your way up. We don't have a landed aristocracy. This budget is, I think, pushing us toward a United States form of predatory capitalism, even as it's failing and falling apart in the United States. I don't think Australia can afford to go any further down that path.
What do you think how some of the problems the budget mentioned can be solved? One thing is young people unemployment, youth unemployment.
The solution, I think, is to work back one step and look at the overall structure of the economy, which is now perilously vulnerable because we've hitched our fortunes to extractive industries. You know, mining, oil and gas, agriculture, not as extractive, but, you know, extractive forms of forestry, for example. They're not big employers. They're hollowing out the rest of the economy. And, you know, coal is one good example. If the Chinese stop buying our coal, that industry is in crisis. So what I think we need to do most urgently is diversify the Australian economy and work out what are the strategic sectors that we need to support that are high employment, that have a future, that aren't extractive, that aren't terribly vulnerable to commodity markets that we've got no control over. So we believe renewable energy and alternative energy industry is one, as replacing the fossil assets with high employing clean energy technology. Telecommunications is the second one. And again, you know, this is opening up massive markets to creative industries. We're educated, we're literate, good language skills, well positioned in the region as Asia Pacific lights up. So telecommunications is the second one. Affordable housing and construction is the third. Really innovative techniques in modular fast build housing that we could, I think, leverage a domestic plantation forestry industry into solving the housing crisis, unemployment, decline in manufacturing, and the decline of timber towns in the southwest all at the same time. And farming and agriculture is the fourth one. In an age of climate change, being a food exporter is a powerful thing, and we should maintain that. So I think those four sectors, they're all high employing, they have a future to them, they can be made sustainable, and then they're not premised on chewing down a finite resource base. And you can kind of see a way through this for the Australian economy. Those four things could, I think, sustain a vibrant services sector. And we've got to remember the largest fraction of employment in this country is tertiary, it's services. It's not guys driving trucks. So I think those four sectors, at the very least, are where we need to look to.
What about education, which is also the young people, our future?
Well, for education, again, that's something that I think most Australians would be justifiably proud of, is that we have built one of the more egalitarian primary and secondary school systems of anywhere in the world, and we're busy undercutting it and eroding it and privileging financing the private school sector. I don't have any problem with private schools. I just don't think taxpayers should be funding them.
But we do.
We should, well, but we do.
Big time.
I think really what we need to be doing is exactly what the Gonski report suggested, which was a needs-based funding model as rapidly as possible, increase funding and send the increases to the schools that need them the most.
Why do they claiming, Joe Hockey and the others, we got a problem with the education system when we got a world-class education system even in high schools and primary schools, then we got a very well-working university system. So why should we touch it? Why should we fiddle with it?
I would love you to get Joe Hockey on your show and ask him directly. I have no idea why they're going down this track. It is so blatantly against the evidence. If you look at the different countries that we might compare ourselves to and say, should we follow a North American model of education and healthcare where you've got the elites very, very well catered for and the rest of the population starting to fall through the cracks. Very expensive system that, again, it's the industry bodies that are running policy. It's the private health insurers rather than the public interest that's holding sway.
Another sort of lie of the government, they're saying we got a rapidly aging population. How does it, your age, you know, relatively fits into the average age of Australia? or the Australians?
I have no idea. I'm 44. I don't know what the median age is in Australia. I mean, there's no question
What
that
do
we
you think?
have an aging
Have a good
population.
guess.
But it's not, I don't think it's the catastrophe that it's being lined up to be.
No, but they're
I don't buy
lying. My
into it.
point is, they're lying with education, they're lying with the aging population. Australia's average age is 37 years, which is the youngest
Yeah.
in the Western developed
Well,
countries.
now you're making me feel old. What we do have, though,
Was not the intention.
is a generation of people for whom superannuation has completely failed, particularly older women, that the pension simply won't be enough. And if you don't own your own house, then those later years in your life actually look desperate. And there's another cohort of people who may well find themselves at risk of homelessness.
So why don't we talking about this one in the Parliament?
Well, we are. That's why we're there. That's what we show up and do every day.
Scott, the capitalism which is represented by America and the British, it's in a crisis. And now the Chinese and the Russians working together, they signed the biggest ever commercial deal in the history of capitalism. How do you see the future of Australia when everything is rapidly changing?
We've got to get used to the fact, my entire life, I guess, divided into two periods of the Cold War duopoly between the United States and the Soviet Union, facing off with nuclear weapons on either side, and the rest of geopolitics was seen through that lens, to a vastly more complex world now. We've evolved out of the United States being seen as the sole superpower, and that's changing very rapidly. We're returning to a much more multipolar world, which I think on the one hand feels more dangerous, but on the other hand there's more opportunity to go back to the founding principles of the United Nations Charter, which was about prevention of war, and it was about solving international problems through diplomacy rather than massive violence. And I think what Australia could really do with is carving out an independent foreign policy that doesn't just assume that whatever the United States is doing in the region is necessarily in our or anybody's best interests.
Thanks very much, Scott,
Thank you.
for the discussion. And don't forget, please, next week, same time, same channel, one-on-one shadow boxing. Have your say.